The Minecraft world record you're watching right now is impossible to beat, yet it's been beaten 5 times. You see, for nearly 3 years now, players have been claiming that this specific world record is impossible to beat, yet each time they've been proven wrong. So what exactly is this world record, and why do people think it's impossible?
Up until a few days ago, it was said that 3.9 was the human limit for Minecraft bridging. However, one player took it upon himself to prove everyone wrong and decided to go for 3.85. And of course, we're talking about none other than the #1 bridger in Minecraft history, Duga. Duga has a history of breaking more Minecraft bridging world records than any other player to this day. But even with a track record that good, how exactly did he go about beating an allegedly impossible world record? For a long time, records in the Minecraft bridging community were broken on a weekly and sometimes even daily basis. However, this has come to a stop as players have now mastered the fastest possible strategies, and there are very few mechanics the community has yet to learn. Over the past 6 months or so, the world record on mcplayhd.net has changed by a mere 0.15 seconds, moving from 4.0 to the very recent 3.85. To put that into perspective, here's just how fast 0.15 seconds really is. 6 months of progress, all for that? Despite this, players are still actively coming up with new strategies that can get comparable times or are potentially even faster than 3.85, but I'll explain more on that later. As I mentioned before, 4.0 seconds was the longest standing world record in this category and originally thought to be the final time. But this quickly changed with the development of 2 new strategies. Firstly, a change in momentum allowed for players to bring their times down by a tick, getting a 3.95, which quickly turned into 3.9 seconds due to the head hitter that you can build at the end of your island to shave off 3 pixels of distance. More recently, the concept of a 45 strafe was theorized to be useful. However, while this is true, the 45 strafe only saves around a pixel of distance at very best, and with its immense difficulty to pull off properly, it's barely worth it to attempt. The only real use for it comes in a unique way to do a different head hitter, but I'll let Dugail explain that in the interview later in the video. On top of this, several other new mechanics were discovered, all promising sub 4 times, but none that promised a world record. The only strategy that was theorized to get 3.85 at the time was a 1.054 block flat, which is the fastest but most difficult way to start off your bridge and is something that no current player is capable of doing consistently. I'd like to mention that as of right now, the 1.054 block has not been implemented into any world records, meaning that at the very least we can get a 3.8, and going even further than that, it's looking like chained 4 block flats are going to be the next wave of Minecraft bridging, as chaining more than one of these at the very beginning of your bridge instead of only one will allow for players to get a time of 3.8 seconds at best. Both the 1.054 block and the chained 4 block tellies are something that players are not able to do consistently at the moment, but with the track record of bridging players improving super quickly, it's likely that we'll see these being implemented into a lot of bridges very soon. Considering all of this, the best possible strategy for bringing the time down to 3.85 was simply a change in momentum. When you hear this term momentum being thrown around, all it really means is that his turns, keystrokes, and timings were absolutely perfect in every aspect of his speed tellies. To understand exactly what was going on in Dugail's mind a little bit better, I decided to hit him up for an interview to see exactly how he pulled off the world record and to figure out what exactly he has planned for the future in order to improve this time to potentially even 3.8. So let's start off by talking about your theories for how you originally thought you were going to get 3.85.
The first idea I had for like maybe 3.85 was like this weird setup that you can do to get extra momentum at the beginning. This allows you to do a 5 block flat instead of a 4 block flat, which is what you usually do.
And what about the double head hitter? Did you ever think of that as a possibility?
Like, there's just straight up, you don't have room for it. Like, you barely even have enough room to do 1 head hitter, so there's no way you have enough to do 2. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you want to talk about 45 strafes for like the clutch momentum maybe?
Like, a lot of people think that 45 strafe saves like more time than it actually does. Like, especially on short mode, it barely does anything. It's like, I think when I was testing it, it saved like 1 pixel if you do like a perfect 45 strafe.
Really, 1 pixel?
And it does help with like the L clutch. So for the L clutch, you 45 strafe, you do a no clutch, and then as you're falling for the no clutch, you place these 4 blocks, and then you can do a little head hitter right here. So like, this is a strat for 3.85, but slab is just easier.
So like, now that you have 3.85, what are your next steps, and do you think there's a human limit that we're reaching at this point?
It is definitely beatable. You just have to do like a 1.05 flat. After that, like, I don't know if anyone will ever beat 3.8, or like if that's even humanly possible.
You heard it here first. 3.8 is the final time that anyone will ever get in this Minecraft category. Years of development and bridging have led up all the way until this very moment, and now the race has begun to see who will finally get the last world record. Ever since telebridging became the fastest bridging method, players have been trying all kinds of different ways to make it even faster. By far the biggest and most obvious example of this is the speed telly, which to this day is still the fastest bridging method in Minecraft. Actually, the Andromeda bridging. And after speed telly bridging became very popular, eventually players started doing tap speeds, which save a single tick for each speed telly done. At this point, the world record on MC Play HD's short mode was a mere 4.0 seconds, with players completely lost on how to progress any further than this. Yet, somehow, less than a year later, the time has dropped all the way down to 3.8. Now, this time difference of 0.2 seconds is of course very minimal, but for bridgers, this is a huge time gap. You see, Minecraft is measured on a timing system called ticks, where each tick is 1/20th of a second, aka 0.05 seconds. The whole concept of speed telly bridging, or more specifically tap speeds, is that they utilize every single tick to be about as efficient as you can possibly get. And once every tick was being utilized for jumping, turning, or placing blocks, the only thing that determined a change in a player's time was their momentum. I'll let Crimson go more in depth about momentum later in the video, but what you need to understand is that for the most part, players focused on maintaining their momentum with tap speed tellies, and trying to gain momentum with them was something that wasn't really heard of. The biggest thing, however, that impacted this world record to go from 3.85 to 3.8 is something called the 1.05 4 block. A 4 block is the most advanced way to start off a telly bridge, and requires the player to turn around and place 4 blocks in a flat line before landing on them and jumping into a speed telly. But the thing that most advanced bridgers do to check that their 4 blocks are correct is when they fall in the void after one, they check the time it took them before they respawned, and in most cases the time shown on the right side of your screen will be 1.1 seconds. The vast majority of leaderboard bridgers all do 1.14 blocks, minus a very small group of 2 players who are capable of doing 1.05s. These 2 players are Crimzel and ZyQT, but out of the 2, Crimzel is far more well known for being able to do this, and he is of course the player that got 3.8. The biggest issue, if you remember my video I made about this previously, is that there was no active players in the community capable of doing the 1.05 because, well, Crimzel had kind of stopped playing altogether. However, while it's very common for bridgers to take breaks, it's even more common that when they come back, they're better than they ever were before, and with Crimzel this was not an exception. Once Crimzel came back, he was quickly able to recreate all the skills he'd been able to do previously, which of course included the 1.05, except upon his return he also brought a completely new strategy for how to do speed tellies. We know that speed tellies are a great way to retain your momentum while bridging, but Crimzel had discovered a way to increase your momentum as you went on with the bridge. Upon finding out this strategy, Crimzel decided to turn off the keystrokes on all of his clips so that no player could figure out what he was doing for a while. He claimed the reason for this was that he wanted to test other bridgers to see if they could figure out what he was doing without him telling them anything. But once some bridgers started to get a little too close, specifically Dugo, he decided it was time to reveal the strategy. The strategy he was using to gain all this momentum with his tap speeds was something that players are now calling a full turn speed telly. But who better to explain this than Crimzel himself? Okay, before we jump into the interview, really quick, if you aren't subscribed and you are enjoying the video this far, please do consider subscribing. Okay, back to the video. I know with the new world record you have a new strategy you've been using for speed momentum. Could you just explain that really quickly?
So you pretty much just press A when you press W and D. So then you can hold W longer, and then you get more momentum.
And is that something you kind of just, like, how did you figure that out on your own?
So I did it on accident once, and then I saw the keystrokes. I didn't really do it for a while, but then in a couple of months, I just tried it, and then I could do it easily.
So it was kind of just stumbled upon it and realized, oh, I actually have a world record strat now. That's sick. So I guess now that you know you have this new strategy, do you have like a specific time that you think is like the human limit for bridging?
3.75 is probably going to be possible. 3.7, I don't know. Maybe.
So now that you have the world record on short, do you have big plans to take over normal mode as well?
Not really. I don't really care about normal. I mean, I'll probably get 7.35 or something. But I don't really care.
Just casually. I'll probably get to do something. So 3.7 is technically possible?
Yeah, but you have to do 1.05 flat, do a 4 block speed out right after that. And then gain so much momentum, and then you have to do Predator.
Yeah, that's like unreal. You heard it here first, 3.7 might be humanly possible.
You see, for an entire year now, Minecraft's best players have been claiming that this specific world record has reached a human limit, meaning this record is impossible to break without cheating, yet each time they've been proven wrong. This time, however, they may actually be right. Let me explain. Minecraft bridging is a very useful mechanic that has evolved tremendously over the years, and what started out as simply clicking fast has now turned into a series of robotic movements, perfect timing, and mechanics so advanced that you've probably never even heard of them. But it wasn't always this way, and for the longest time, bridging was believed by most to have already been pushed to the max with no way to physically improve upon any of the known strategies. At this time, the world record on the biggest bridging server in the world, MC Play HD's short mode, was a time of 4.0 seconds. This time was achieved through the use of chain tap speed tellies, a strategy which is still the fastest to this day, but in the past year has changed dramatically. But this is where it all began, with 4.0, the first ever time to be considered the human limit. Fast forward to today, and the time has dropped by an incredible quarter of a second.
leaving the current world record at a time of 3.75 seconds. This quarter of a second change, however, is the result of nearly 2 years of bridging development, thousands of hours worth of practice, repetition, and studying aspects of the game that would probably otherwise still be entirely unheard of. And the journey to reach 3.75 is truly remarkable. Minecraft Bridging's largest server started out with only one mode, known by the community as normal. This is the mode in which tele-bridging first became popularized and where some of the biggest names in the community at the time, such as Dugal, Bedless Noob, and Krennic, learned the advanced in-game mechanics of bridging. Eventually, however, the server decided to release a mode called Short, which was approximately half the size of normal, and due to there being less room to make mistakes in such a short gap, the mode quickly became popular, often even more so than the primary normal mode. As players at this time had already managed to get a grasp on tele-bridging and some even knowing how to speed tele at this time, the Short mode leaderboard was already quickly filled up with highly competitive times, and over the coming months, players would begin to approach the first ever perceived human limit of Minecraft bridging. As more of the community began to catch up with players like Duga, who had managed to get a grasp on speed tele-bridging extremely quickly, many players began to realize that those at the top of the leaderboard had all stopped improving, each having reached the exact same time of 4.0 seconds on Short mode using tap speed teles, a type of bridging that saves a single tick per speed tele as opposed to just holding the spacebar down the entire time. Up until this point, the direction for players to improve in Minecraft bridging had always been a very clear path, as simply copying the strategies that were being innovated on by the best of the best was enough to retain a high position on the leaderboard. But once everyone and their mother had mastered the tap speed tele, the entire community was suddenly at a loss on how to proceed. It was at this time that the concept of momentum was first introduced, something already fairly self-explanatory, but players in the community realized that if they timed their turns and jumps absolutely perfectly, they could shave off an entire Minecraft tick off their times, bringing the world record down to a much lower 3.95 seconds. And while the optimization of momentum in-game had barely changed the world record at all, it opened the floodgates for bridgers to start finding little imperfections and potential ways to break the world record well beyond 3.95. It was at this point in bridging that players stopped focusing on creating faster bridging methods, as it was common knowledge that unless you could pull off this absolutely perfectly, tap speed teles were the fastest bridging method out there. For this reason, the best bridgers in the world began to focus on a part of the bridge that had never seen much attention before: the clutch. You see, when a player does a 4-block flat tele into 6 chain speeds, it's almost always necessary to clutch by placing one single block on the end island in order to not fail the attempt. In general, and on most servers, this is the fastest way to clutch on the end island, apart from having crazy momentum and not needing to clutch at all. However, on MC PlayHD specifically, the end island has a small hill on it, which players started to theorize about using to create a head hitter. In Minecraft, a head hitter makes your player move slightly faster than sprint jumping, but initially when I spoke to players about the possibility of this strategy, most of them seemed to think that it wasn't any faster. For months after I had suggested the idea to top players, it seemed that it had been largely forgotten about. However, eventually I started to hear the term being thrown around, and eventually this became the main strategy that players were using, until eventually Duga would break the world record and get a time of 3.9 seconds using it. And only a few days later, this was also tied by 2 players known as 3clicks and Geklo. After seeing players achieve this already deemed impossible time, I started theorizing about the possibility of this being the human limit for bridging, as it seemed that even the best bridgers in the world were completely lost for ideas on how to break the record past this point. One of the ideas I came up with at the time was the concept of a double head hitter, as I had learned that the single head hitter did not in fact save a full Minecraft tick, but rather a few pixels of distance. A double head hitter, however, would theoretically save even more distance, but every single bridger, including all of the tied world record holders at the time, said that this wouldn't get 3.85, as by the time you would actually place the 2 head hitter blocks, you would already be too far along to utilize one of them, rendering it useless. After this, the double head hitter was quickly disregarded and never utilized. Well, at least not until around a full year later. Foreshadowing. Around this time, 3.9 was also achieved without the use of a head hitter by 3clicks, and from there it became clear above all else that momentum was the key thing players could still improve upon. By optimizing their turns and keystrokes, players were able to achieve incomprehensibly minimal improvements to their in-game momentum. Players at this time began to focus far more on perfecting their momentum, while simultaneously also starting to use new strategies such as 1.05 second 4-block flat starts, which was essentially just the insanely optimized version of a regular 4-block flat, which would normally take 1.1 seconds, conveniently around the same amount of time it would take you to subscribe. But with momentum now being the entire focus of the bridging community, players were literally going into replay mode after every single attempt to measure the exact coordinates of their players after each speed to calculate their momentum, and of course eventually this led to the 3.85 that at this point players already knew was coming. But after achieving the 3.85, the entire community was convinced that the human limit had been reached, a consensus that seemingly every top bridger agreed on, except that one player, a bridger named Crimzel, had suddenly turned off his in-game keystroke mod, hiding his strategies from absolutely every other player, and was suddenly starting to successfully pull off strategies and times that no other player could do. This strategy strategy that Crimson was hiding is now known as the gain momentum strategy, where not only do you perfect your momentum throughout doing the speed tellies in order to not slow down over time, but instead your player actually increases in momentum throughout the bridge. Using this strategy, Crimson managed to bring the world record down to 3.8 seconds, now leaving the entire community in the dark on how to progress, until eventually he decided to share the strategy with others, and of course it didn't take long for other top bridgers like Dugal and Geklo to catch up, tying the 3.8. Of all the world records to happen below the 4-second mark, this was really the only one that players knew to be possible far before it happened, but the only real reason for this was that at the time of 3.85 being the record, every player in the entire community, including Dugal, the world record holder, said that
I don't know if anyone will ever beat 3.8 or like if that's even humanly possible.
But after reaching 3.8, the bridging community began to diminish substantially, with top players either quitting or going on to do moderately impressive things like breaking the Java speedrunning world record. For this reason, it wasn't until somewhat recently, nearly 10 months after the 3.8, that the bridging community would see a new world record. On April 1st, 2023, a player by the name of Stratoni would shatter all beliefs around Minecraft's limits, achieving his second ever world record in Minecraft bridging as a whole, and his first ever on short mode with a time of 3.75. This completely thought to be impossible time was achieved by utilizing two new strategies, one being the double slab start, where the player first begins the bridge by placing blocks 2 blocks lower than the regular starting position, allowing them to have less airtime travel at the end of the bridge. And the second strategy, the double head hitter. That's right, I called it a year ago and everyone said it wouldn't work. But what makes this 3.75 so significant, and what's to say another player won't come along and break this record in the future? Well, according to Stratoni,
I think 3.75 is probably the human limit because I can't really imagine someone getting 3.7. I think it'd be insane.
according to both Stratoni and Dugal, the only possible way to get 3.7 is through the use of a perfect 5-block flat start, followed up with 5 perfect tap speeds and double clutch at the end of the bridge, something that both consider to essentially be impossible. So is this it? The human limit of Minecraft bridging? Only time will tell, but if I've learned anything from making 5 videos on 5 different human limits, the end is still yet to come. Bro, I'm so tired of saying things at a human limit. This is literally never gonna end.